I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which I record this podcast, the land of the Kabi Kabi peoples. I pay my respects to the traditional owners of country and their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today. Hi, Smart Community friends. In this episode of the Smart Community podcast, I have a great conversation with Dr. Nathaniel Bavinton, who you may remember from way back in episode 183 when Nathaniel was working at the City of Newcastle. Nathaniel is an urban sociologist and associate director at Urbis, working in their Smart and Sustainable Places team. In this episode, Nathaniel tells us about data visualization as an essential tool for making complex information accessible, and about COVID-era advocacy work combining data with local stories. We discussed the City Intelligence Platform and designing for business communities, including lessons about simplifying map-based visualizations. We also talk about creative applications of data through augmented reality and virtual reality experiences for Indigenous dual naming projects. We finish our chat discussing the collision of skill sets needed for effective data storytelling and the importance of thinking about narrative structure when working with data. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the Smart Community, Smart Regions, Smart Towns, and Smart Cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Nathaniel. How are you today?
I'm great, Zoe. How are you?
I am very well. It's so great to see you. Let's just jump straight in. And can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and current work?
Okay. My name's Dr. Nathaniel Bavinton. I'm an urban sociologist by training. That's my sort of academic focus back in the day. I'm interested in the intersections of city design and planning with technology and innovation from a social behaviour kind of standpoint. A lot of my work sort of sits around there. I am a associate director at Urbis, which is an urban consultancy, and I work in the Smart and Sustainable Places team there, which is within urban planning. We work nationally around sustainability and innovation and technology for cities, and we look after sort of energy transition and renewables business as well. My previous career was in local government as a smart city practitioner, and a fair amount of the examples I think that we'll talk about today are going to be drawn from that experience. I worked at the City of Maitland in the Hunter and then moved to the City of Newcastle, where I established their smart city program, and then we grew that into a more broad-based team that included economic development, sustainability and climate action, and nighttime economy and place activation. So some quite diverse strands. And our whole around that team, which was called Innovation and Futures, was preparing the city for a future where innovation and technology and digital services and data are fundamental to everything. So it was really about bringing the smart city capabilities and toolkit, if you like, into contact with these other more traditional local council initiatives like sustainability and economy. Yeah. So that's kind of the quick summary of the work career. As an individual, I'm really passionate about creating places that work for people, that spaces that are more inclusive and more creative and enable more innovation. I think that we've got some big problems, both on the horizon, but right here in front of us in the short term. And I think we've also got some excellent tools to solve those. And it's really about bringing that toolkit into contact with those big challenges, and data to inform decision making, data to get beyond the anecdote to the real pattern, and data to provide confidence. I think they're all really important parts of that mission. That is my personal mission and my work and career mission.
It's so great when your personal mission aligns with your
Yeah,
work
100%.
mission, isn't
Yeah.
it? I have the same, what's that? Ethos, ideology, which is exciting to have, right? Where our work and personal kind of, lives mesh together. I don't see them as very different. Anyway, that could be a whole nother episode, I think.
Yep.
Which sometimes can lead to burnout because we're so excited about the
I was
work,
gonna say,
the whatever. So
that can be a challenge on both sides. Yeah.
we turn it off. Yeah. Maybe we can talk about that in another episode. But now I know, you're working with Urbis now, you're working with all different clients. You have so many different examples. So let's just start. I'm going to start with you because then you can draw from whatever organization you've worked for. So how do you use data visualizations or storytelling? Or how have you as well?
Yeah. So lots of ways. So from the sort of, I think that, let me take it back a step. Data needs to be organized, right? And most people don't have the skills to read data in sort of raw or coarsely organized form. So as an academic, I'm a social science researcher. So I've been working with data my whole career. And so there's always been this complexity around, well, how do you get the story across? And the story is not necessarily the data table, right? And more recently, it's like, well, how do you get the insight? Well, they're related things, and the story's the narrative is the vehicle for the insight, I think. So I've just been really conscious for a long time of the need for this additional set of steps around data to make it consumable, right? And that's around very interesting ways to present it. My way back in 2010s, when I was finishing and publishing my PhD, I was really interested in really new and visual ways to communicate the data sets, and got some kudos from examiners around how I'd approached that. So that really kind of shored up for me the idea that the presentation of it is as important as the actual data that's being presented. If the mission is people taking away from it what you want them to take away, like making sure that scope for misinterpretation is limited, and that they're consuming it in a way that is approaches how you intended for them to experience it. So lots, that's the background. Infographics and iconography and that type of thing is really important, right through to strategies that are around behavior change, that are really around how different data sets are communicated to show complexity, or to not reduce complexity, to make complexity manageable for people. And then, so that was kind of in the academic side of things. And then when we started at the City of Newcastle to build data platforms and, visualization software and all the stuff that goes with that capability, we used to think really hard around that presentation side, through to really highly visual formats like augmented reality and virtual reality experiences to get things across, and dashboards, that kind of at a glance consumable snacks of data, key indicators, lots of experience with map-based data visualization, spatialization. I think that most people relate to map views pretty naturally, and it's a really good way to position people in the experience of the data, because they can, they know where they are and they can literally put themselves in the map. So doing some work right now with some clients around that, where we're using map view to show distribution of data across the region, but also to show performance of the region against different metrics, heat maps and color codes and that type of thing. So Yeah, lots of ways. We'll talk about some other kind of more specific cases probably through the chat.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for sharing those examples, because it just shows the enormous breadth of visualizations and storytelling just from, one person's career. That is certainly not at the end of the career either. So there'll be many different ways. And I also think showing what you said about that the presentation is just as important as the data if you're trying to get a message across, which most of the time we would be. I'm wondering whether there is a time when you're not trying to get a message across, or maybe it's not as important because maybe you're just, throwing the, I don't know, it's just part and parcel of something else, or I'm sure there's examples of
I think
that.
people just don't think about it sometimes, though. Sorry, right? They just assume that, like, this is really true in academia, I think, because everybody's trained with data there, right? So you assume that everybody can basic things like read a table, right? And then you transition into a community-facing role, and you realize that knowledge is taken for granted, and it's not true. I mean, that's the whole logic behind data literacy capacity building programs, right? Is so that people can get to the point where they can ingest data in a more considered way.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And where do you see now do you see a shift now in us as practitioners actually, rather than, I mean, I think increasing literacy in terms of data and digital is important, but then the flip side of that is us as practitioners speaking the language of the community and using visualizations and stories to be able to do that as well. Do you see that happening more and more these days, or is that something that is still yet to develop, or not as important?
I think it's really important. I would say it's still not mainstream, but it's emerging rapidly as an approach, and that's probably from some experiences that haven't gone so well for organizations that really depend on that community support. And you learn a lot from being burned, don't you? And about what not to do. And I think that the tools are evolving as well that make, like, the things you might not necessarily think about, but the democratization of visualization software. I'm not talking about Power BI and things like that produce data like tabular formats or Esri producing map formats. I'm talking about stuff like Canva, where anybody can produce a really easily understandable visual story. I think that's made a difference. Those tools of visual communication becoming cheaper, but also people more skilled in them. And now, of course, we've got Gen AI, which is, giving you, basically you can just dictate what you want the visual to look like, and the magic will happen, So I think that it's only going to become more common that people choose to explain their stories visually. And when those stories require data, that's you got great material to work with, right? It's exciting. I love that stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've been playing with some coding, like using AI to do some coding for me, and I realized how powerful being able to tell a story to get what you want, to dictate to it, which basically you're telling the AI a story of what you want to create your story for you, or whatever it is. But how powerful that is, because then I'm coding and I'm using like Kaggle or whatever, and I'm like, oh, I want to do this. I go now to type, I need a graph that's green, whatever. Or I want to understand, it's actually more like, I want an insight that tells me this, what should I look at?
Yeah.
So then I'm still making the decision, because what I found was, okay, it can make some code for me, but if I don't understand what it's doing, then I can't be confident of the results, and I can't be confident of then what I'm playing. Like, if I've changed something back here, how do I then trace that all the way through, whatever the case is? So that's been really interesting. And I also think from a data storytelling perspective, telling that story of what's happened to the data along the way is also really important when we do start to then, when these tools, well, they're already accessible, these tools are more and more accessible, but
Yeah.
I think more people will be then asking where's that data? One, where does the data come from? How's it been collected? That kind of thing. But then the next bit, how have you analyzed this? And did you analyze it, or did you use it, whatever tools you're using?
Yeah.
And how do you know that the answer that you're presenting is the I wouldn't necessarily say true or correct, because it could still be true or correct, but is it the intended answer that you're wanting to
that's really interesting, Zoe. I think it's like just another couple of steps on the journey of data provenance, right? So being able to show that line of sight from the ethics of your methodology right through to the transparency of the algorithms that were used, if any sort of tech support was applied. But you bang on around, it's not, is it true or not? And I think a big part of the uplift in digital literacy is people understanding that there's many, many ways to interpret data. And that's why I think the data story is such a good description for where it's all headed in this trend. Because stories can be true without them being factual, right? Because that's the whole history of human storytelling as myth and as, communicator of culture is, right. If the truthfulness is about the relevance to the audience as much as it is around the accuracy of the data. And so that when people kind of acknowledge and recognize that, then understanding all of those processes that you just sketched out that have the data's gone through to become part of that story, that is as important as the message, if you like.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's true in that context, or through that viewer, through the creator or the audience's eyes, because it's actually both, isn't it? The story that I'm telling, we were both there, but I have a different story about the party we went to than you do, because I looked at it through a different lens or whatever. And this is what happened, and even this is the way I perceived it to happen as well. I could be like, oh well, Nathaniel was doing X, Y, Z, but actually, no, you were doing something else, but I only saw it from a different direction or whatever. And it's still true from a story perspective, and the data, that's my data about it. And then there's your data about it too. And so it's interesting to question from increasing literacy will increase questioning, hopefully, as well, from a critical, I think one of the things with AI is if we lose our ability to critically analyze and think, then that's when, things are going to go sideways. And so it's then how to work with it to then still have that rigor as we start to then use these tools more and more, and for different I guess use cases and things like that.
I think that trust in systems as we go forward, that is also another whole podcast. So
yeah, I agree.
I'm sure you've already covered it many times.
Just in my own brain, going over and over again. No, it has been definitely trust, not necessarily in this context, but trust in visualization, storytelling, and trust in the data is so key. But you're right. Now it's adding that other layer of systems. And it was always there, of course, the tools that we use and things like that. But now that seemingly anyone with a device and internet connection can create a really beautiful looking visualization for I think the big thing is for not much money, or
exactly. That's
seemingly
what I mean,
no
democratization of the production platforms. But in another way, that's a problem as old as science, right? So that's the whole triangulation of data is an attempt to that attribution, and being really kind of transparent about source material. Those are kind of efforts to address that challenge before the current format. So when you think about triangulation in terms of data storytelling, you're saying, well, is there a requirement that I demonstrate I'm getting beyond my personal lens that you articulated and the biases that go with that by showing, well, here's multiple data sets coming together to inform this insight. But immediately that amplifies the complexity of what you're trying to communicate, right? So, that's all very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. Every time I have these interviews, new things come out that I'm like, oh, I could research that, and I'm like, oh my god, my PhD is getting so massive. Okay, so let's go back to like some specific examples. So, and again, I know you're going to have many, so maybe we just have a little think and then come down to a few. But and again, this is quite a big question, but what issues or problems have you used data storing and visualizations to try and address throughout your, I guess, work and projects?
So I guess as you say, there's lots. Let's focus on a couple. So one is we did a whole program. It was during COVID, actually. That team I mentioned, I led at Newcastle Innovation and Futures. We were sort of moved very quickly sideways onto managing the community and economic response to COVID for council, which was, a thrilling ride, right? But part of what we were trying to do there was to advocate for the resources that Newcastle needed to mostly the state government, but different people who were helping at the time, and as you remember, the data in that period was moving so quickly that it was really hard to pin anything down on it. So we established a program where we were getting daily briefings from a university research centre that was just trawling the internet for best practice ideas, what other people were doing, and we built that in so we could be really iterative. And in complement to that, we wanted to make sure that the local stories were part of this advocacy, because it's like how do these in this case global trends impacting a local environment. So we just created a series of communications that were around this is the local, this is what we think needs to happen, and this is what we need, and this is the local story exemplifying that. So we found that really effective to bring that sort of to anchor the problem in the local context. And so the storytelling of that data was like around here's, primarily visual in terms of simple formats like infographics and, up arrows and down arrows and, nothing very complex in the components of this visual storytelling. But the logic to kind of use that visual storytelling to tell a story that showed how big dynamic processes impacted local people. And then you exemplified that with case studies, like people telling their local stories. So you're like marrying up a data indicator with a short video of someone telling a story of the impact of that on them, right? So that was one thing that I think was really interesting at the time, and we were just kind of cobbling it together as everything happened in that time.
That's really interesting. Just to pause on that for a moment. Interestingly, I'm currently doing a systematic literature review on persuasive data storytelling, and it's really fascinating to see the spike in papers from 2020, 2021, 2022, probably 21, 22, because of COVID, because people had time to look at data, and there was so many visualizations, and you could do a lot of benchmarking across. And so anyway, really, I found that fascinating. And again, when I was like looking at just how many papers were out or whatever, I'm like, oh, there's quite a spike here, and then it kind of drops off again. Because we had this, I mean, I know many people have said it, this, real life world experiment, global experiment, but for data visualization that also saw impact in that as well, because like you said.
I mean, it's a perfect example of a really complex thing that needs to be communicated to a layperson in a way that they can get really quickly, right? So it's a perfect test case for visualization. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sociologists will be looking
totally.
back at that period for the next 100 years in terms
Mm.
of the volume of data collected in around so many facets of community life, and for sort of that X-ray function on society. Anyway,
Yeah, totally.
talk about that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Again, another podcast.
Yeah.
Just to poke that for a moment. When you were saying, so you've got the stories, the data, and then like the stories about like how that's impacting locally. What was then the impact for on the decision makers, or what needed to happen, and was that able to then happen based on what you were presenting to them?
Yeah. So we got pretty good. Like the first audience, I think, was the decision makers within council, right? So that there's that tier, and then there's up to, the other state level bodies. But we that process generated, I think, a series of 6 or 7 advocacy pieces that went up on a different theme each time. So one might have been around social infrastructure, and one might have been about innovation ecosystem, and one was mental health and well-being, like whatever the things were coming up that were emerging out of that period. As you know, I've touched on everything. We got really good feedback from the recipients of those advocacy pieces, that they were really well designed and helped to communicate what was needed. And I can't recall if we could draw a direct line of attribution to any particular grant fund or whatever. To its credit, City of Newcastle was really proactive in supporting the community and economic response from its own coffers. So it's not like we couldn't do anything if we didn't get a state government support. But they were really well received, both from that decision maker layer, but also we involved so many people in the community on the production of them. That had its own sort of benefits that are still being felt. Newcastle's always been a place that collaborates pretty well, but that period really cemented that ethos and that approach to problem solving. What I think, what I just want to call out is the diversity of visualization approaches, right? So you've got, because you know that people are consuming information in different ways, and different ways of telling the story touch on them in different respects. So the stat and the icon and the up arrow, that's aimed at the head, and the video of the local person saying, I've lost my business, or it's going to close if I don't get some help, that's at the heart, right? So you're able to sort of, if you can curate all of that so they work together, then you're sort of able to tell a more holistic story that, a graph doesn't do, on its own. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important to draw out as well, because if you want someone to do something about it, rather than just take the action coming at them from different angles of how we make decisions, because as humans, we do not make decisions just with our head or
exactly
rationally. You were going to go to another example. Did you want to go to that one now?
I can talk about another one where we were specifically trying to visualize for a segment of the community, in this case, the business community, a whole range of diverse data sets that kind of come together to paint an accurate picture of their locality. So this project was called the City Intelligence Platform, and it brought together place-based data like patterns of utilization, the kind of thing that you've seen me work on with you, but also business location data. So what's near me and who are they and what do they do? And then stuff like transport data and weather and all those types of things. So the end result was that you're trying to give the end user a capacity to make a informed decision, and that might be about when do I open, or where do I set up, or where's my supply chain, or whatever. And through that process, we really learned a lot about what I was saying at the beginning about the assumptions that you have if you work with data, that everybody is able to, that it's legible in the same way to people. So and you're trying to show lots of data sets, and, the obvious way that someone like you or I or our friends would do that is you create layers in a map that people can toggle on and toggle off so they can choose what they're looking at. But that just assume you got time poor businesses, like they're running a fish and chip shop or a pub or a hardware store, right? They need the stuff provided them in a less, in a more curated way that is less dependent on them being able to operate the system for the skills all the time. So, that whole journey was really interesting in terms, and so you move slowly away, I think, from geographic-based maps to more stylized place maps, right? They really strip out a whole lot of the not relevant content. I think you're conscious in terms of that. So that was another journey that went for quite a long time to understand, and it really showed some of those limitations in how you present data effectively. Yeah, and then the last one I want to talk about is sort of the creative application of data. So our program, like I said at the outset, we tried to bring smart city capabilities into contact with things like nighttime economy or whatever. And so there are a few different things we tried around sort of data is art, that type of way of presenting it. So projections that show different data sets as moving flows or whatever. I think that's really interesting as well, because it's just about picking a communication style that fits the audience as much as it fits the story. So there's other examples around sort of using immersive experiences to communicate data. Now, I know that, so we did a project around dual naming of place names, so giving places an Indigenous place name, not like we just all agree to call it that, but through the Geographic Names Board, which is a whole process you have to go, so formal names.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to communicate all of that in a way that honoured the original owners and the project participants who are from those different communities, those Indigenous communities, and but also you can't do that in a dry way, right? That's got to be experienced. So that project produced firstly a VR immersive experience of what the Newcastle headland looked like before colonisation, and that's to kind of help position that. And then we were able to extract from that certain bits and pieces and build on those, so that in these different places you could, through augmented reality, you could sort of overlay the First Nations behaviours, like fishing or carving canoes or whatever, or sometimes just chatting, and over what you were seeing now. So you were able to sort of bring forward that data. I know people would say, well, that's more storytelling and less data, but all that digital information is data, right? And that was a really interesting project as well, I think, in terms of a really creative application of it, where the experience of the information is the point, not someone taking away a particular stat or whatever.
Yeah, well, I guess what they take away potentially is the experience of it, and then they remember certain things that then they can share with other people to then also experience or whatever they, maybe the thing that they take away is just that, oh, this is the name for this area.
Yeah.
And I feel connected to that now because of this experience I have with the data. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
In all of those examples, you have really, I guess, emphasize the co-design element or the community involvement element. So when you think about data storytelling, is that participatory element really important, or is it just a coincidence that is always what's happening in your program?
Well, I think they're the same, right? Because it is important because that's how I think everything should be approached. So that's why, I guess, why it's embedded in all that project design. But it depends on who you're trying to communicate with. So you probably don't need to co-design with the executive the icons that go on the dashboard. You know what I mean? Like maybe with comms around the color palette, so it's brand aligned or whatever. But if you're dealing with what we started out at the beginning as being trying to simplify complexity without making it dumb, like acknowledging that the world is complex and that data is how we cut through that complexity. So you can't reduce it, you just have to find a way to communicate it. And all that story we told at the beginning around different interpretive lenses and all of that. So I think that if you go into a problem like that, trying to communicate something complex and you don't know how people are going to read it, then that's a massive risk on your project. So that's the reason why co-design is a really effective methodology for most things, but particularly for this, where you're trying to understand, well, this is how the end user experiences the world. This is what matters to them. This is what the information would shape a decision for them, and this is how they need to consume it. And that's got platform and media implications, as well as the data storytelling and the visualization itself. Like, how do they consume it? I just think it's so important to involve the end user in the process. Otherwise, pretty good chance they don't want it.
Yeah, and I think touching on process is important because you mentioned that earlier around, like, it's not just then the outcome, but involving people along the way.
Yeah.
And how that, like, the people involved get something out of it, even if most of the time they might be the consumer as well, but even if they're not the consumer, they get something out of that then can potentially impact them moving forward as well. Like, if you think about that COVID example, they might then feel more supported by the local government. Therefore, they're going to share that message with other businesses or whatever, and then they can form more community bonds so they can get through it together, or whatever the case is. So I think there's a lot.
I'm a big advocate, Zoe, not just of co-design generally, but of kind of learning by doing around this kind of emergence space. So that's the other benefit, right? Is that people get an actual appreciation of a deeper appreciation of something if they've laid their own hands on it. That's got its own kind of logic and benefit to it. You're beyond the project outcome.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And maybe this weaves nicely back into like that whole life and work being not just separate as well. Like, you can do a project at work that then can impact then the decisions you make about where you're going to go next and things like that, and that can be really impactful for community members, for people shifting careers and things like that, but also I think on policy decisions, and like it expands out to then how people start to make decisions that then have really big impacts as well.
Yeah, that's right.
So what are some of the key challenges then when we are creating or presenting data visualizations and stories?
Key challenges. Well, we've talked about the risk of misinterpretation. So as a sociology guy, there's lots of different ways that comes about. We assume certain norms that are not normal. That's really prominent in like a multicultural context where people, as simple as they literally view the page from a different angle and direction, and so how if you lay out your visualization, for example, to be top to bottom, left to right, then there's huge portions of the global population who don't read information in that trajectory, right? So unpacking all of that stuff. Potential misinterpretation. I guess we've also covered a little bit around the idea that like the literacy gap, and then it's not quite a literacy gap. I'm going to call it the boredom gap, right? Which is that people who work with data think that everybody wants to be data informed. I just don't. That's probably not true. And so that's a huge opportunity, right? Is to use visual storytelling and visualization to snap things down. You're really good at this. I admire the work you do on LinkedIn in making science communication really snackable. So that I think that's a huge opportunity and value of visual storytelling, is to be able to do that at a glance stuff that might cut through or make sure that you get a wider, broader, deeper audience for your stuff.
I think another thing we talked about was the data, like the actual data itself. And I think a challenge perhaps is how you, and I'm taking this from what you were talking about earlier, is how you then show that kind of like transparency or uncertainty or whatever in the visualization or story itself. Because sometimes, because as you said, we've all got these different lenses. So that can be a bit of a challenge, I think, if you're trying to show, particularly if you're a government organization or whatever, that some people say, oh, there's only one version of the truth. But I think in data storytelling, we can show different, you can say that you can show different versions of the truth within the data story as well. But that can also be it can be a challenge of how you do that as well. And I think that can create a lot of complexity, but also the misinterpretation is big too.
What do you think about just as you were speaking, I was thinking there's actually like a kind of colliding skill set needed to do this stuff well as well. So you've got a certain set of traditional disciplines about being able to understand and read data and interpret it effectively, and then there's a kind of a set of creative disciplines around art design, basically, right? And traditionally they've been certainly they're serviced through different pathways at universities, right? So that it's historically it's been rare people that have all that together naturally, but there are exactly the things that you need to be able to do this well. So that might be this just hypothetical, that might be just a challenge, I think, emerging, is that it's the degree programs that teach this probably don't exist, or they're not common, and
you don't have the right students in them.
The aptitude to do that.
Over there.
Exactly. And so that's for some of our university friends. Maybe your research center should sort of develop an approach.
Well, we are the transdisciplinary school,
exactly.
We're the place. But I think you're right. And I think, this draws it's like a mirror to the smart city space, because there's, we've talked about this, you've got your like business intelligence or business knowledge, and then you've got the data that you need to then the smart city person kind of then like in the problems you're trying to solve is basically this translator that has to have these two unique skill sets merged into one around understanding the data enough to be able to then help the business solve the problem as well. Whereas if you only talk, and I've experienced this where I'm talking to data people and I'm like, oh yeah, but what if we did this or that, the other, whatever. And there's like, can you just tell me what outcome you want, please?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I want to work with you. Let's like, what else could be possible? Blah, 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 blah. And it's like, that. And so I think it's a similar thing here where you'll have both, and not to say, like both have merit, and then coming together, they're just like gonna
complement each other.
Because just going back to your like misinterpretation, that is so, if we don't have these people that understand both, then that is really hard, because the creative could look amazing, but then it's not true to the intention of or whatever the insight, and vice versa, where you go, oh no, that's the data comes out, but then it's not visually appealing, and so
that's right. No one's going to care
anything with it.
And to complicate that further, then you've got that sort of ability to engage with and work with people to understand that kind of the recipient side of the story,
Yes.
which is another leg to the stool, and also hasn't, like, data people are not known historically to be super people oriented.
Yeah, like
Artists more
engineers.
so, but you got all these different skills coming together around this problem of how to, as the world becomes more dependent on data insight to sort of be well designed and to solve these big problems we got. Those different kind of disciplinary backgrounds need to find a way to overlap more.
Yeah, and I think to your point earlier around like the boredom factor or like attention span, right?
Yeah,
and it's not even just intent. Yeah, like I think boredom factor is nice because I mean it's attention span, but it's also we have so much information.
Yeah,
and we can do so many things, and there are multiple opportunities or whatever. So we're like in this kind of overwhelm. It's not just me as a person; it's me as the professional, and then the person, the decision maker at the policy level is also a person that has this same phenomenon happening to them as well. Right. And so being able to consume things, and we don't want to lower the quality, we don't want to lower the rigor, but we need to cut through, otherwise it just won't be heard.
And not quite synonymous with that, but related is that any type of art form works on like a trend logic, right? So you see in data storytelling and visualization, right? And so this is back to that risk of just kind of pumping it into an AI to generate it for you, is that if people are swamped with the same kind of visualization over and over again, and that initially that's working because it's new, but then it becomes blasé because it's overused, then that's a problem as well, and so we went like, dashboards had their heyday, and then it was 3D, visualizations, and then infographics have come and gone and come and gone and come and gone, and the art style that underpins that is a trend. So there's a lot in this. You've picked up a really complicated thing. I guess that's the lesson of a PhD. Everything's complicated once you stop and think about it for a minute.
Yeah, totally. And I think the trend element is a really interesting one, because what that means perhaps is that you can't actually have a set of 100% foolproof design principles. Maybe you can have principles, but you can't have like if you want an effective data visualization, here's your checklist.
Yeah.
Which I guess is kind of obvious again once you think about it. But then to like, it could be the best one, but if it's the first one I've seen as somebody consuming it, I love this. But then if I've seen it 50 times, then I'm like, I've seen this before, even if it's completely different data, or it's like, it doesn't have the visual hook or whatever because I've seen it before, which is really challenging because as a trend thing. But then on the other side, you kind of like trends on TikTok or whatever, people watch them because they're a trend or because and then people do. Right. So it's like a bit of a.
I remember with the first time, Zoe, that those bubble diagrams came out, and they brought together for the first time plotting on a 2x2 grid or a north-south axis, and then a trend line, and then other information around size of population or size of impact, And so I remember looking at those the first time going, that's phenomenal, the amount of insight that's packed into this really simple diagram. But on the 1000th time that you see a bubble plot diagram, you stop really engaging with it and reading into it to extract all of that insight that is embedded. You just go, it's a bubble, like, that's high, that's low, and that's big and that's small. When really those so much work must have gone into thinking up that kind of visualization, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now it's part and parcel of
it's just the furniture.
It's just now we are at time, so we'll wrap here shortly. But I just want to bring the concept of nostalgia to story, because I'm imagining now that those the graphs that we used to see that you don't see much anymore, or like the these old school diagrams and things that be those coming back as kind of a hook as things all come around as well will be interesting to see. But again, those cycles and trends another
Yeah.
layer.
That is really interesting. Nostalgia in visualization. Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
Oh, I think it's almost if you accept that there's a trend dynamic going on, then that is for sure going to happen.
So much in that.
Mm.
Okay, now we've talked about lots of examples, so let's not dwell on any more, even though I know you've probably got heaps. And if there's any other ones, you can send me some links so I can put them in the show notes as well. We are at time, so let's just go to the last question, which is any suggestions for listeners to use data storytelling in their own work or life?
So it's been a wide-ranging conversation, and we've probably covered a few, so I'll just repeat a couple of that are takeaways, which is definitely think about who you're communicating with in detail. It's not we're not talking about community groups, but like different positions in society have access to different types of information and experience with those, so thinking about sort of clusters of attributes rather than, that's a particular community I'm trying to reach, like at the individual level, and involve them in, like, the best way to find out what they want is just go talk to them, right? So that whole logic. I think there's something interesting around the two parts of the phrase, so the data and the story. So humans are storytelling creatures, and so that narrative logic is intrinsic to the story, and the data's the content, really. So the story is the vehicle, and the data's the what's produces the flavor. And so when you think about that in a proper structural way, then if your narrative has beginnings and middles and ends, and it has conflict, and it has resolution, and it has a character arc, like, if data storytelling is not a label, if it's a genuine description of a process, then think about the story part. And go do a creative industries course on novel writing, so you get all that explained to you, right? But if you're serious about that, then I think that's an important way to do it well. And then when you're looking at the data, you're asking questions like, okay, well, what's the conflict here? What's the insight that is the resolution or the denouement of the story? What's the beginning of the story, and what's the middle, and what's the end, and what's the transformation of the main character through it? And that, so I think that's important to do it well, and simple, which probably flies in the face of what I just said. But, people, like we've talked about, people don't have a lot of time. So if the mission is to get people to understand the insight, then it really needs to be distilled down, like my example of the maps, where we stripped out everything, every bit of information that wasn't part of the story you're trying to tell, and ancillary, then just move that out, because you simplify the content, but you also reduce those opportunities for misinterpretation, because there's less there to communicate, to potentially miscommunicate. Probably more, but there's some important ones, I think.
Thank you so much, Nathaniel. I think that's the perfect way to end this interview. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
It's been a pleasure, Zoe. Thanks very much for having me, and good luck with it all.
Thank you. I look forward to our next conversation. Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. You can find the show notes for this episode and all other episodes at zoeether.com/podcast. That's zoeeather.com/podcast. Have you got a question for me or one of our guests? We'd love to hear from you. Just shoot us an email at hello@mysmart.community. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you follow the podcast wherever you listen, and connect with us on LinkedIn too. And hey, ratings and reviews are always welcome. They help more smart humans just like you find the show. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.